Now when training calisthenics, it's super common that we get discomfort, we get pain. Often places we feel that is the shoulders, the elbows, the forearms, the wrists, the low back, the knees, the ankles, the hips. And if you speak to anyone that's been training for a while, they've probably got a couple of areas that play up on them. So me personally, my left shoulder doesn't like me, my right hip plays up sometimes. And when I push the volume on certain exercises, my elbows flare up. Now learning how to manage this and obviously not make things worse, we want to make things better and ideally get into our position where we don't really have any aches or pains that stop us training. But reality is we're probably going to run into some of these things as we go. Now the biggie, if we have pain in our body that sticks around and or gets worse, go get checked by a professional, whether that's a chiro, a physio, a doctor, whatever. Just get checked in person just to see if there's anything underlying that we need to know about. Today I'm going to go for a few reasons why this could be happening and some suggestions on what we could do to make things better. Now, in no particular order, lack of conditioning. So this is very common with things like handstands, where our wrists, our shoulders, our body's just not used to being upside down. It's not used to having all of our body weight suddenly on those little parts.
Like the wrists, so we're not used to doing this. Suddenly we turn upside down, put all of our body weight into our hands, into our wrists, into our shoulders, into our arms, and the body just starts to inflame. It gets unhappy. We're so used to being like this. So we need to slowly increase the conditioning of the thing that we're training. So I often get asked, what exercises can I do to condition, to strengthen the wrists? And I normally give the same answer. I would just slowly increase the volume in the handstands. So if it's a handstand movement we're doing, we just need to do more handstands over time. We don't want to do a 2-hour practice on day one. We might want to do a 10-minute practice after a good warm-up, but I wouldn't do any specific exercises to strengthen the forearms, strengthen the wrists for handstands. I would just do handstands, but make sure we're not overcompensating, and I'll go through that in a second. But the main thing when it comes to conditioning is just get the volume right for you. So if you're totally new, you want to be starting off with very small, short sessions spread out throughout the week, and then listen to the body and just slowly increase. Next, we've got lack of mobility. Now, this obviously goes hand in hand with lack of conditioning as well. So if we're new to something, our body hasn't been there before, we'll probably find that we don't have the range of motion needed for the thing yet. So we might need to increase that to make things easier. Now, because our body is amazing at compensating and getting the job done, we often will use the wrong body part if we run out of space in the part of the body that we're supposed to use. So a good example of this is overhead mobility. So if I try and put my hands above my head, but my upper back is too tight, and so when I get to here, I can't literally put my hands above my head. Now I could beat the shoulder up to try and get it there, or I could compensate at the hips. Now notice what I've done there is I've arched my low back and I've taken my hips forwards. So now I've got the overhead position that I wanted, but I've used the repositioning of my hips and my low back to get into it. So now if I loaded this position, whether I'm inverted in a handstand or I've got a barbell above my head, that energy is going to get stuck in my low back. Where instead, if I slowly increase the mobility or I make the position slightly easier. So say I'm doing a handstand and I'm trying to have my hands this close together, it's much harder to take them above my head. But if I take my hands wider, bend the arms very slightly, suddenly I can get up there and it doesn't demand so much mobility. And then over time, as I increase my mobility, I can slowly move the hands back together. Same thing, if I'm going to go into my tuck planche, I have my fingers pointing forwards, I have my hands quite close together, I actually can't get into this position because that's now starting to kill in my wrists, in my forearm. But if I externally rotate, take the hands a little bit wider, so give myself more space because I don't have that mobility, then I can get into the position much easier. And now look, I can hold that position and it's not killing the wrists and the forearms. So yes, we should be trying to increase our mobility, but obviously this takes time and we still want to work on the skills while we're doing that. So coming up with ways to allow the body to compensate in the right way by taking wider positions, externally rotating, or even backing off on the progression, so you can still do the movement while you're increasing your mobility. So a common one now is wrong progression. So now this could be we don't have the strength, so we're missing strength. We could be missing skill, mobility, technique, or we might have the wrong equipment. So if I'm working something like a handstand push-up on the wall, but I set myself up like this and I bring my head down between my hands like this, now I run out of space. That's hurting my elbows if I go any further. But if I do this, if I externally rotate, if I take my head and shoulders forwards, create a triangle, my arms come in, look, I can now go all the way to the floor and I can push back out again and I don't get any pain in the elbows or the forearms as I lower. I haven't changed anything, I've just made the technique better. But if I didn't fix that, that would be the wrong progression for me and I'd be better off backing off to a pike push-up where I can then work on that correct technique because the intensity is less. And now I can get that correct, which sets me up in the proper place to go into the harder variation. But if I don't have enough strength for the chest or handstand push-up and I attempt to do it, then it's going to end up in a bad position. Now I'm dumping into my low back and I'm trying to push out like that. Now this is just going to cause pain in multiple places in the body because my body's just collapsing because I don't literally have enough strength to push back out. And again, then I just need to know that regression. I go to the pike push-up or to dips or overhead pressing, something that's going to make me stronger so then I can do that movement. Now, it could just be down to a bad habit. Now, when it comes to habits, especially the bad ones, they can be hard to find because we don't know we're doing them. So having someone else assess your technique or video yourself and watch very carefully to see what you're doing. These often come in with things like low back discomfort. And you'll often see this sort of thing in handstands where people will be in this position for their straddle. They'll try and take their body to the wall, but they'll be there instead of closing their low back to the wall, especially when doing things like presses, tuck handstands. They'll look like this, so they're just really arching the low back. When they do their kick-ups, they'll tend to be having one leg down all the time because their hip flexor is so ingrained in everything they do, so they stand more in this position. The body becomes very strong with this closed hip position, and then the low back is always in an anterior tilt. And that's where energy and load will get stuck. And they can also be things like funny techniques that we use when we do our skills that just overload certain parts of the body. It doesn't have to be low back. I definitely got some bad habits around the shoulders. And they can often be tied in of where your body feels and thinks it's strong, so it always goes to it, or a safety or a postural imbalance or something that's been conditioned by a pain or a previous injury in the body. But like I say, they're hard to see, so get someone to check you, check your form, and also just video yourself and see if you can see them. And then we have our program, so what we're following. So the program might be amazing, but it just might not be right for us in that moment with the body under the certain amount of load that we're under. So we have to constantly listen. So I program for people all the time, but there's no way that I can guess the right program for them for next week, for the following week. You're the best person to understand if the program is right for you in that moment and any modifications you need to make, especially to progressions and intensities and how hard you're pushing your body. But with calisthenics, if we're constantly going for bent arm strength skills, straight arm strength skills, both in push and pull, joints are going to start to get overwhelmed if we keep pushing the limits and pushing the intensity. So this will come when we're doing things like ring muscle ups, where we're flexing everything really hard, going through grinding lots of movements through the elbows, through the forearm, through the wrists, while also working handstands, planches, levers, back bridges, etc. So things are going to start to hurt. They tend to be things like the elbows, forearms, and the wrists. Now you can do exercises, so you've got prehab, rehab type exercises, but normally it's just too much intensity and we need to back something off to reduce the overall volume. Now here's a few guidelines to follow. When it comes to rest days, that's going to be very dependent on the individual, what's your training history and what your body is used to. I personally don't rest completely on any day. I'll always do some sort of handstand practice, but it'll be very low intensity. I won't do handstand push-ups or presses on maybe one of the days, and it will just be more a little bit of balance play and some sort of easy mobility, so lower intensity, just visiting positions and things like that. Now, if you're totally new to training, you could do complete rest days, but I still recommend that you visit, have some sort of easier daily practice, but it might be just some general mobility and things like that. Then we have our body's foundations, so hydration, nutrition, sleep, breathing, thoughts, emotions. Those are things that are going to go up and down naturally day to day, depending on how much load our body is under. In an ideal world, these would all be perfect. In reality, that's not going to happen. So what we just need to do is be able to steal from each one. So say we're lacking on some sleep, we just need to make sure that we've got good hydration, good nutrition that's feeding that one. So our overall load on the body is as low as possible. 3, we need to take advantage of the extra time. So if we're resting our upper body because of an injury, we can work on our lower body skills and or mobility and just redirect our energy and time to now the lower body instead of the upper body. And again, number 4 is similar. Taking advantage now is that we need to refine, maybe reprogram, and take assessment of where we're at and what we're working towards. And then the other big thing to take into consideration, if your name is Sarah and not Bob, you're going to have to listen to your body even more in terms of your monthly cycle, inflammation, hormonal changes, things that us guys don't have to take into consideration so much.
And it might be that you drop down to easier progressions or just bring the volume and the intensity down a little bit during those weeks. Reach out if you have any questions with this one. If you're after programming, check out my app, link is down in the description. And I'll speak to you in the next one.